So I've figured out that basically when you're remixing or DJing, in terms of creating a new production from old productions, basically you're doing these basic steps. You're organizing, so you're labeling and you're finding what parts will work together, and you're maybe making some cues and putting them in the appropriate places, maybe playlists. Okay, and if you're remixing and it's an older track, you might do some cleaning, you might do some restoration. There might be resonance buildup, you might be removing some of that, some de-essing, any kind of restorative process. The next thing is to level it. So there's a lot of plugins that can level the volume throughout a whole track. So when you mix it in with the new tracks, you want to have them the appropriate sustained level. So leveling is a cool new development they came up with. Instead of using just like compressors to squash everything, you just keep everything at a targeted gain level. So and another one is resequencing. So you have the part. Now resequencing is kind of tricky because it's almost changing the chords too. But what we're doing with this resequencing is you have like a riff and you change the riff around using resequencing. So this is like a basic idea to like make a riff more interesting, or just kind of mute certain parts of it, or just like a basic chopping. You're chopping it up, reorienting it. Just think if you had a guitar and it played like 3 notes, but you only want to play the first note and you want to play it 10 times. So resequencing is kind of a concept of locking this riff to the grid and then remangling what was already provided to create something else, and then later on capturing that. And that's the final process in the resequencing. If it works, then you go on to the next stage. So if you don't need to do any resequencing, or you do, you can also do resounding. Now resounding is an encompassing concept I've come up with. So this is where you would think of something like granular synthesis or transformative synthesis, or like replacement synthesis. And what you want to do with resounding is you have, let's say, a purpose for a stack of instruments, and you want those instruments to do that purpose, but you don't want those particular instruments. So this is where resounding comes in. So instead of having like the guitar, you could either beef up the guitar in a weird way, or you could have an option to modify this using effects and then transform those sounds however you need to do that. That's resounding. So you're basically like resynthesizing the sound using some process. It could be spectral editing or whatever, but it could be more basic stuff like just adding dub to make a different kind of aesthetic to the sound. So the next thing you're doing is you're remixing. So all of this is kind of, you got to think of all these in this order, but also like you have to go back and forth between the stages as you redo certain parts, because remixing has to do also with resequencing, and these are things you have to always keep in mind. So remixing is the obvious one. That's where you're just taking, pieces from here and there and then dubbing in different parts or replacing parts. Like a drum beat, for instance, might be an acoustic one section, and then another 4-bar section. It could be the regular 4 on the floor, et cetera, stuff like that. Okay, upchording has to do with taking whatever pre-existing chords were in the mix and then messing with that. So there's a lot of technologies that can extrapolate chords and translate chords, such as Melodyne, but there's other ways to mangle chords and to take them into a new place, a spectral place, if you will. So upchording as a concept is kind of like X-chording, I really want to call it, because I like X riffs as my main overarching, new idea. But upchording is basically just taking whatever chords were there and then either locking them together. While you're doing the remixing, you see what chords are in conflict, and then you change the chords as necessary to fit the desired output. So that's upchording. This is an example of it. And then, of course, the final stage is additional effects, kind of an additive stage, where you would take whatever that final masterpiece you already got going on from these other steps, and then add even more cool either live, on the fly. Now this effecting section is important because I've thought now that basically you need a track-based system, and then you need a top timeline-based system. And the top timeline-based system doesn't actually have to have a wave file. And instead it can just be on a grid, like a measure-based BPM grid. And then at each designated part, an effect could be used, or rig of effects, or just various kinds of ideas of effects, implanted into the timeline. And then you know that, it's going to bypass all this stuff, and it's going to apply that effect to this master timeline track, so that you can quickly do that without having to cut. Let's say you have like 20 different mix tracks going on. You don't have to go and cut and snip and mess around with all the little parts unless you want to do that extra production. So you would just use something as an overarching affecting process to do it in one quick go, and then using the timeline would take care of the technicalities of being able to apply that effect to the entire mix.